Welcome to Aware. We are dedicated to communicating information that inspires your positive growth and change. Are you interested in a peaceful planet? Are you interested in optimal health? Are you living with purpose? Are you enjoying your life? We realize each person can make a difference, and our mission is to empower your awareness. The choices that you make in every moment shape your life, and we encourage you to realize that you have your own answers and to always listen to your own truth. We invite you to stay aware. Hello, and welcome to the Aware Show. I am Lisa Garr, and it's such an honor and a privilege to be here today because I get to talk about experience. Today is going to be an experiential show. And I really invite you to lean into this conversation and listen and absorb and learn, because we're talking about some of our deepest soul's desires to have worth and love and how that really shows up in our lives. And so I'm really excited about my guest today, Abiola Abrams. She is an award-winning author and an intuitive self-worth coach. And I love those three words, intuitive self-worth. We're going to find out what that means. Coach, by the way. She is the founder of the Mawu's Goddess Mystery School and the Goddess of Manifesting Global Retreat. And she is also a first-generation American daughter of multi-generational leaders, seers and farmers from Guyana, South America. And she is also a descendant from several West African nations. And her personal development teachings are based on the power of ritual, on meditation, on chakras from ancient wisdom, and the goddesses and the ancestors. And I can't wait to hear more about your story. Welcome, Abiola. Thank you for joining me.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm so excited about this conversation.
Yes. And your story sounds absolutely incredible, to where you are now with these incredible goddess decks and the oracle cards and the book that you have with Hay House, everything that you're doing. I'd love to find out how it all started for you. Take us back to the beginning.
Sure, sure. So, first of all, again, thank you so much for having this platform for these kinds of conversations. I really believe in my heart and soul that this is a part of our joint evolution. And so, thank you, thank you, thank you. I am a New Yorker, born and raised. This is what
Yes.
broadcasting from today. I'm the first person in my family born in the United States. And so it begins for me in New York City as a kid who, like most of the people listening here, I'm sure, didn't feel like she fit in necessarily. And it's kind of become a cliche to say, but it really is true that when we don't feel like we fit in, it's because we're here to build a new earth, to put forward the energy of the new earth. And so for me, growing up in New York City, it looked like New York on the outside, but in my house and in my family's yard, it was Guyana all day, every day. And so, things that I look back on that are funny to me now as an adult, like at one point my parents had a chicken in the yard, things that got us teased badly
In
as a kid.
in New York, I can imagine. I mean,
New
at
York, can you imagine? Like,
no, and that probably was very difficult at the time. So, how did you learn to manage and to cope with that and to accept that and realize it wasn't about what other people thought?
it really was very difficult at the time, and I almost didn't have a choice in coming to the conclusion that it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks, because my family and I were teased. We were, told go back to our country. I had a lot of different difficulties with trying to fit into, the people in my schools or the people in my neighborhood, or all of those things. And it's almost like when you don't fit in anywhere, you have no choice but to come to the conclusion that, okay, it doesn't matter what they think. It doesn't matter if these people like me or not. But for me, it was a really, really long journey. And I would say up until the point where, I ended up marrying someone who I was very much in love with and went to school with and knew since I was 12 years old. And when that relationship imploded upon itself, it very much it very much was a wake up call for me in, that my people pleasing, all of, the ways that I was, my codependency issues, all of my challenges and issues with trying to be lovable, that I
Uh-huh.
needed to surrender.
I
and
that's quite the way for that to show up, because if anybody said earlier, I'm sure you'd known about the people pleasing, but if you hadn't experienced it that way, for it to really hurt or be in your face about it. And that is sometimes we wait so long, not by choice at all, just by needing to cope and needing to get through the day or get by or make ends meet. And all of a sudden, we're not looking at this issue that's right here, right in front of our faces, that we can't see
Yeah,
anymore.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, for those of us, who identify as women and grew up as women in this society, in the Western world, and in most of the societies around the world, we've been told in various ways that we're less than. We've been told in various ways that, something about us is broken that needs to be fixed. Maybe it's you. No, it's not you. Maybe it's Maybelline. Like we've been told over and over in many different ways that things are wrong with us. And so it's not that you're not making this up. If you are listening to this and you have challenges with, insecurity or inadequacy, give yourself some grace. You're in a society where you're bombarded with ads, X amount of times per day telling you that something is wrong with you. And you were also taught and trained by people who had that same conditioning. And so how wonderful for us to, to be able to then say, okay, I'm taking my life back. I'm taking back my sovereignty. I'm taking back my agency. But for most of us, it's a challenging road up until, we have that realization.
Well, even when you were growing up with your family, and inside the house was Guyana and outside the house was New York City, did you have that base of love inside the house, that base of belonging inside the house?
I did. I very much, which is a privilege. I very much was very lucky that I had two loving parents, who were doing the very best that they could. However, they didn't understand me. They couldn't understand the things that I was experiencing. And they were in their own relationship struggles and issues of codependency and issues of, all of their different challenges, and so they couldn't teach me. I say all the time, that people can't teach you how to love themselves who don't love themselves. So they couldn't teach me how to be, not be in people pleasing when they're very much people pleasers.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them in very different ways, but they're both people pleasers. So they couldn't teach me how not to do that, when for them that was the way that they cope and interacted with the world.
That's so interesting that you had that experience of at least feeling love, but it was still kind of a dysfunctional love in a way. Yep. And and then that carried through your own relationship. And how did you, and I love that you said it in a way that you took responsibility for the relationship, at least your part of the relationship. I'm sure it'd be easy to say it was his fault or it was this fault or that fault, but you said, look, I took responsibility for my part of the people pleasing. How would you suggest to somebody to lean into that need or that desire to want to people please, but to lean into the authentic truth instead?
Okay, so if you have challenges around people pleasing and prioritizing the needs of others above your own, and and those are things that you are dealing with, then that is a self-esteem challenge, a self-esteem issue. People don't like to address that because it doesn't look like necessarily for everyone what we think that someone with low self-esteem could look like. And so there are all kinds of people who are highly functioning, beautiful, amazing, perhaps wealthy, successful people that are dealing with self-esteem challenges. And so it really begins with self-acceptance, having a moment, where for a lot of people you may have to hit a rock bottom in that, but having a moment where you have to begin by accepting yourself. I always say that if you can't figure out at this moment what self-love means, start with self-acceptance. Start with self-acceptance. I talk to women predominantly, but folks all the time about manifesting. For example, I was just having this conversation in the circle right before we got on this conversation, and I was talking to a client who couldn't figure out, it was the question, what do you desire, was really challenging for her, this beautiful, incredible, independent, seemingly powerful, highly successful person. The question, what do you desire, for her was a really challenging question because it wasn't something that she ever allowed herself to ask. It
Wow.
puts very vulnerable question to say, wow, okay, allowing yourself to have desires, to express your desires, not just your safe desires that you or your family or your spouse or whoever, your children or whoever would think are safe things to say, but your unspoken, big, scary, hairy desires.
Yeah. Right. It's sometimes it's that we know what we don't want, but what do we want? And how do we want to feel about what we want? And
Yes.
we spend so much time on what's wrong or what's not working or the chaos, that to say just to want peace is enough. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because she said, well, but what if it doesn't work? What if it doesn't work? She's like, if I don't desire, then I don't have to be in the realm of wondering, okay, well, what if it doesn't work? I said, but what if it does?
Hmm.
It all,
Yes.
what if it all works out? What if
What
it
if it does? And this is, I think, the time where the acceptance or the vision of what can really work out needs to be taught to us. Like, how do we learn that when you're looking at everything in your life of what's wrong? I mean, how do you look for what you desire? How do you do that?
Well, you start at just the very beginning with the question. This is why journaling is such a wonderful healing tool to get to know ourselves. You start with the question, what do I desire? What do I like? Who am I at this moment? Because you are rapidly evolving. And so you already, Goddess Lisa, are totally different Lisa than you were in the beginning of this conversation.
Yep.
So
Mhm.
what you desired and what you were into 10 years ago or 5 years ago or even at the beginning of this year is not necessarily the same thing. So allowing yourself to push yourself beyond in a way that makes yourself uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Allow
Right, right.
willing to make yourself uncomfortable.
I've been really leaning into this, excuse me, this conversation about to lean into what's uncomfortable, lean into the uncomfortable conversations, because that's where the growth is. I'm still learning how to talk. Sorry. That is where the growth is. That's where you, it's hard, but it doesn't bypass you. You hear something, it's off, it's wrong. And how can you authentically and lovingly? So I was talking to my mom, and there's a long-term friend that she's had for maybe 30, 40 years. And this friend predictably will let my mother down, predictably. But does my mother ever say anything? No. She just lets it go and she lets it happen and she just rises above and she moves on to the next. And she thinks she's doing really, really good by doing that. And one would think that's a very noble thing to do, rise above it. So what happened is that the final time, and like 40 years, she let her down a very last time. And what does she do? Blow up at her, because it's years and years and years of anger. And then it just came out. And I don't blame my mom, of course, for doing that, but I also look at the responsibility, the codependence there, that in my mom's forgiveness of letting her get away with this, and this, of letting her down over the years, it was a noble thing for my mom to do. But was it? Was it really being authentic? Look, you can't get away with this. Look, you've let me down again. Look, this isn't about you. It's about the whole big picture. And I think that that's the more powerful place to be for everyone involved. And it's not easy, but if you do it in a loving way along the way, it doesn't result in this big blow up. I'm just learning this. Was raised by a mom that taught me to do the noble thing.
Right.
It's not, it's bypassing.
It is absolutely bypassing, and I completely relate to both you and your mom. And I've had those situations in the past repeatedly with my very good friends where it would seem to them that out of the blue I was blowing up about something like blah, 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 like it just came out of nowhere for them. Whereas for me, it had festered and I'd been dropping hints passive aggressively over
Yes.
time. And so it's like, then I felt like, well, how could they not know that I felt like
Right.
that? Because I hadn't communicated it to them in a way that was workable and honest for me and honest for them. And that I felt that, I was being noble, but what I was really being was fearful, of making them uncomfortable, of making myself uncomfortable by having a real conversation, by daring to be vulnerable enough to have a conversation and say, hey, this hurts me. That
Mm-hmm.
hurts me when you do that.
Mm-hmm.
That takes vulnerability. All of the things we're talking about are within the realm of divine feminine empowerment, divine feminine energy. And I'm not talking about gender expression. I'm just talking, we all have feminine and masculine energy, yin and yang, if you will. And so we're talking about yin energy and how it
True.
shows up, how we want to empower that part of ourselves.
I think it is actually both a masculine and feminine conversation to lean into the uncomfortable conversations. I really do. And it in everywhere that, at this time right now, we're in this huge conflict in Israel, and the whole region is under this intense conflict that could blow up at any moment. And what I know of the people that are on the ground there, and we have several friends on the ground there, they are leaning in to help. They're all instant volunteers, and they're all helping in any way they can. And the humanity, I think, is not something we hear about on the news because it doesn't have a lot of fear attached to it. The humanity of someone from Israel helping a Palestinian mother and daughter is happening. And I know this to be true, and we don't hear it. And I do believe that once we can take that, all of the ideas of what's around us being uncomfortable, and lean into it with the compassion and the love, that's the key. Not to blow up, but the compassion and the love is the key ingredient. It's freeing. It makes a life of freedom.
Absolutely, absolutely. Compassion and love is the key.
Yeah.
100%.
Not
100%.
easy.
Not
Not
easy. Mr. Rogers would say, look for the helpers.
Mr. Rogers.
Love Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers would say, look for the helpers.
I didn't think you were old enough to know Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, well, my daughter watches, well, they have Daniel Tiger, which is a spin-off of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so Mr. Rogers is still going.
Well, I know you have a 2-year-old little girl, and this is an opportunity, our generation that's coming in, your daughter's age, and our daughter is 20, that age as well. Those generations that are coming in, this is their language.
Mhm.
It's definitely harder for us, but they're coming in with this language. It's not as hard for them to speak up and to say their minds. I don't know. Maybe it was social media, maybe it's nothing's hiding anymore, everything is out in the open for everyone, but it is part of the narrative that's coming in from younger generations. It's what we get to learn to lean into these tougher conversations. So I mentioned earlier that you are an intuitive self-worth coach. Tell me what that is.
So I really believe firmly that we teach what we most need to learn.
Mm.
And so, if you come into this world and before you're born, you say, okay, well, I would like my soul's purpose to be to remind people, of our personal power and how much you love yourself. Then the divine says, okay, great. Let's give you some immense self-loathing. Let's give you some issues with codependency. Let's give you everything that you need to know that is the complete opposite of that in order to be able to hold space for others and empower others around that. And I have worked primarily with women over the past, 10, 15 years. And there really is a self-worth epidemic.
Mm, true.
Most of the challenges and things that we look at really are a part of a self-worth epidemic. And then the intuitive part of that comes from the fact that I have inherited from my bloodline. I have inherited from my family gifts of intuition, gifts of being a a, a healer, a seer, however you want to term that, is a part of, my natural gifts toolbox, magical toolbox, if you will.
Well, yes, and I'd love to learn more about that. You mentioned that your grandmother was a midwife. Is that right? Your great
Yes,
grandmother, sorry.
my great grandmother, who was known as Ma, was a midwife and a fertility healer. Although, like I told you, that's not the language that they used at that time, but she helped women to give birth to their babies, and I help us to give birth to ourselves. So it's the same work, but in a different form, in a different format. And so I believe in there's a principle called Sankofa, which means we must go back and get it. It is an ancestral principle that means that, the things that we need are not necessarily in the future. It's the wisdom of the past combined with the moment of the future. So you were talking about like this next generation and how they are so much more evolved already in being able to have uncomfortable conversations and being able to redefine themselves. That's wonderful. That's exactly as it should be. That's the evolution of human consciousness that, may each generation, of us, any healthy parents want their children to do better, to go further, to have expanded consciousness.
True.
So it's beautiful to me that I feel that I am the expanded consciousness of the work that my great grandmother and other members of my family have been doing, me and several other of my family members.
To midwife a new conversation, actually, is what you're doing a lot of to really, I mean, yes.
Yes,
Yes.
that's it. That's it exactly. That's it exactly.
You mentioned also, or I read that your grandparents were also farmers, and in the world, and I love this. How do you bring forward some of the ancient traditions? As you are mentioning, you're bringing forward the idea of midwifing this conversation. But what about other traditions and ways that we could actually learn from you right now on healing or self-acceptance or self-worth?
So, Goddess Lisa, I'm going to pull a card for us from my African Goddess Rising Oracle deck and let's just see what the divine is wanting us, to know most
I
at this.
love that. Thank you. That's great.
Divination is a wonderful gift for us that all of the wisdom traditions have as a part of them. And the means of divination that I use most is oracle cards. So let's see.
And what's the, I mean, in your tradition, the history of Oracle cards? Because I know there's a lot of them out these days. What does your particular deck represent?
So there are tons of Oracle cards that have come out, particularly since the pandemic and everyone was at home, and they've kind of just exploded on the scene, which is a good thing and also just a thing to be aware of. So it's a great thing in that there are more people than ever who are accessing this personal development tool, which is what Oracle cards are. They are a communication device between us and the divine, and a personal development tool that gives, in a way, divination gives us an x-ray of the soul, is the way that it is said in Zulu culture, an x-ray of the soul, an x-ray of the moment. And the way that in the aspect that we have to be a bit aware of is that not all Oracle card decks are a divinatory system. So there are a lot of decks that have pretty cards and maybe have affirmations or have words on them, but are not rooted in a clear communication system. And that's okay too. You know, I started out by making those kinds of decks, and the decks that I birth, that I create now, are divinatory systems. So I had a fun experience with one of my friends, Colette Barron Reed, who is a prolific Oracle creator, where we were doing a reading and joint readings together with our individual decks, and we were on a stage and reading people in an audience, and we were pulling the same cards from our decks. And so, you know, they're different cards because it was a different deck and different entities that we're reading, but they were saying similar things. So if she would pull truth, then in mine, for example, if it said truth teller, or if she would pull, you know, fearless love, in my deck maybe it says unconditional love, and we were pulling the same exact message because we are both working with true divination systems.
Oh,
And
how fun.
so much fun. I hope to be able to do it again. It was so much fun. And so in the cultures that I come from, every single traditional African culture, from the top of the continent to the bottom, has divination as a part of its root. There are different kinds of divination, from reading chicken bones to, in the Dogon people have a divination practice where they draw lines in the sand, and that the sand fox comes in at night and his footprints can then be read as a means of, you know, reading what is meant to be known. There are traditions that read sand crabs. You know, there are all kinds of, you know, as we know, there are tea leaf readers. Anything, you know, including, you know, opening the Bible to a page. Bibliomancy can be used as divination, you know, but there are specific divination systems that an oracle deck must be based within in order to be a true oracle. And
Oh, I
yes,
didn't know that. So
yes.
it depends on the tone or the prayer or the intention or the message that you want to have come through. Tell me a little bit about yours.
So all of the above plus. So my deck, the African Goddess, here's the cover, the African Goddess Rising Oracle deck, which was lovingly illustrated for me by this incredible woman named Destiny Powell. We're doing 3 decks together, a trilogy. So this deck specifically is African goddesses and ancestors. It's a divine feminine empowerment deck that can be used by anyone, but it is a divine feminine deck that is the wisdom of not only Africa, on the continent of Africa, not only just the 55 plus countries in Africa proper, but throughout the African diaspora, meaning places where African people are throughout the world. So, for example, I talked about in Guyana, South America, where my family has been for the past 6 or so generations,
Mhm.
and here in the US and throughout the Caribbean and various places. And so in all of those places where African people are, there are similar and the same traditions, but then there are places where African people, because of being a part of the transatlantic slave trade and being trafficked, have had to hide their goddesses and their goddesses, their gods, their stories, all of that in in tall tales and in songs and all of those places. And so those of us who are wisdom keepers on the front lines, who are practicing what I call Sankofa, what is called Sankofa, as I said, you must go back and get it, are bringing forward that ancestral wisdom. And it's so awesome, like that I feel so honored that my ancestors chose me for this mission, which shows up in fun, surprising, and totally different ways.
Wow, that's a great exclamation. I mean, for you to bring it to us to that in that way, for us to understand that so beautifully and clearly, I am honored. I'm honored to hear what you have to say and everything that you're bringing forward, especially with the deck. But thank you for explaining it to me like that. I
Oh,
s- you have
absolutely.
such a beautiful way of talking. You talk in pictures, and I hear and see everything that you're talking about. And that was a wonderful way of explaining it. Yes. So these messages were hidden in folklore that carries through the generations and are meant to be preserved the way that they are.
Yes, yes, that's it exactly. That's it exactly. And so, for example, with a book that I have coming out at the time of this recording next year in May is named From Imagination to Reality, and it's the wisdom of this gentleman who lived almost 100 who lived 100 years ago, named Abdullah, who was a Black Ethiopian rabbi living in New York City, who taught the people that we consider to be the new thought leaders. He was their teacher, the teacher of teachers. And so, again, with him, the same, this is ancestral wisdom that I've been called upon to bring forward. Sankofa, we must go back and get it.
Go back and get it and bring it forward. What does some of the wisdom that you know about, what can it teach us about, and I know that you're about to pull a card as well, but what can it teach us um, about peace, about inclusion, about getting along? What
Oh,
can it teach us about that?
well, it's really beautiful. I'm glad that you asked that. And the goddess that came forward for us is so in alignment with that. For me, what it teaches is a message of inclusionism, or I'm not sure what the exact term would be, a message of
Inclusivity, yes.
inclusivity, um, a message of joint empowerment. If the pandemic didn't teach us by now that we're all in it together, I don't know that people are going to ever get
Right.
that. The fact that we're all in it together, that until all of us are free, none of us can really, all of us can,
Yes.
individually be truly have true freedom unless we really are compassionate to all of us who are on this journey together. And so one example is when people will say to me with the African Goddess Rising Oracle deck, they will say, well, that's not my history or tradition. Is it okay for me? Is that something I can have? Is that something I can use? And I will share that, I have been the beneficiary of the wisdom and knowledge of the Kabbalah. I have been the beneficiary of the wisdom and knowledge of Hindu spiritual systems. And so being able to share African philosophies and African spiritual teachings and allowing other people to have access to that sacred medicine, and realizing that how wonderful if we picture all of us together being able to bring forward the same way at a potluck, like, okay, here's my meal, here's
Yes.
my meal, may it nourish us all, is the way that I think of it.
And it was a recipe from my grandmother from her region. And this, yes, of course. That's
Yes,
what it does. It
yes.
nourishes.
It
Mhm.
nourishes. It absolutely nourishes. And knowing that, the land remembers. So when I do ceremonies, I give homage to the people who are initially on that land. So right now I live and work on the land of the Lenape peoples. So the land remembers, having homage and having reverence for them and the works that they did here, and realizing that I'm building upon that is an important part of all of our journeys, and so it makes sense that while we were talking, of course, Goddess Lisa, we can't, as we say all the time in the oracle business, you can't make this stuff up. you know Goddess came forward for us, and I have notes on here because this is my working deck, is Goddess Atete of the Ethiopian people, the Oromo Ethiopian people, and she represents worthiness. And her veneration is hidden today in Mother Mary. So they had to hide her veneration in Mother Mary, and so they wear the women wear rosary beads in tribute to Goddess Atete. Again, a message of worthiness. That seems to be our theme for today.
Very much so, our theme. It's attached to so many things, Abiola. Worthiness is attached to self-love, of course, and it's attached to what we were talking about earlier, leaning into difficult conversations, feeling worthy enough to have the conversation, feeling worthy enough to stand in your own truth. That's a whole nother thing, but it also comes from worth. In business, it's being valued enough to be paid for what you're worth. And
Yes.
that's a big deal. And to do things where you are paid for what you're worth and not taken for advantage of.
Oh
Mm-hmm.
my goodness, absolutely, absolutely. Because I have to share with you that, in the beginning of my career with all of these, different self-esteem and self-worth issues that I had as a kid, then I picked the career, of course, that will reflect that back to you. I went into the entertainment industry was where, I was at first, so I was working in television and aspiring to work in movies. And if you have self-esteem
Oh
issues,
my goodness.
auditioning,
Yes.
I think at that time they're probably a lot more PC now, but in the early 2000s, around then, like, going out and auditioning is, trust me, not the way to build up your self-esteem.
No, oh my goodness. And it's so far out of your control too, because you don't know what they're wanting and their script calls for, their role calls for. And here you are coming in wanting it to be you, but it could be completely different. They could have a completely different idea of what, and it has nothing to do with you. It's not to be taken personally. It's a very difficult business for a reason. And look, I'm in the entertainment industry as well. And I'm telling you, that whole industry is going through a massive healing right now
Yes.
of many, many decades where it has assumed that it has been greater than God.
Mm. Yes, and it's actually the perfect metaphor for life, isn't it? That so many of us spend time auditioning for love, auditioning for, in our careers, being overworked and underpaying ourselves,
Mhm.
or being underpaid, not asking
True.
for what we are truly worth in other aspects of our lives.
Yes, that is so true. Yes. And it is time for us to value ourselves in every point in our work, in our relationships. And as we're speaking with the entire Me Too movement is young women and women from everywhere saying, I value myself enough to set a boundary, to say no, to recognize when something isn't right. And this again is the generation that we are raising. And
Yes,
I am so grateful for that.
I am.
Sometimes pioneers have to go through some tough stuff in order to raise the next generation, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. If we think about the sacrifices that our mother's generation made, and may each of us continue being better. My mother, when she purchased her house in the 70s, her name is not on the deed of her home that she bought with my father. She is listed as Mrs. and my father's name on
Wow.
the
Right,
deed.
right. But this is very, very common. Hmm.
And so again, it makes sense that we would be having these conversations and dealing with these issues not so much after that. That was not
Yes.
long ago,
It wasn't that long ago. My mother's generation as well was Mrs. Edward Garr.
Mhm.
And it was very, very common thing to do. And actually, in many ways, it was the law. It was the law. And it was identified through the keeper of the family or the keeper of the house. And I think in this day and age, that's been rethought. And many people, especially now, are not. I think there's a really high statistic of unwed mothers that are choosing to have children out of marriage, which is also completely acceptable, and raising their children with the Village of Women.
Yes.
Very common trend in our 20s, 30-year-old generation right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that it's really, you know, again, the idea of there's an African philosophy of each one teach one, each one bring one along, and so oftentimes I will say to people, if they one of the things that you can do if you are struggling with your self-esteem, struggling with your self-image, is to go and volunteer and help someone else. Help someone else. It sounds counterintuitive, that, well, I've got my own issues and I got my own problems. Well, we're a community that is, together. And so, it's wonderful that Western culture prizes individualism, but it's also to our detriment if we think that we are somehow separate or removed from others. And so if you are having challenges, go rejoin your energy to the community by volunteering, by giving back, by helping others, and realizing that we're all together in this.
Yes, talk about compassion. I mean, it completely changes your perspective on everything. And also, I mean, I'm really big on a life of service as well. So I understand the point of also being paid what you're worth. And you can do that also and live a life where you're of service to humanity. It's a different valuation. It's
Yeah.
not dollar for dollar. It has to do with your ability to serve the greater good or be a part of a larger whole. And
Mhm.
there's part of our society that's still in that dollar for dollar, hour for dollar mentality. And that's great. But there's also no monetary value put on compassion
Yeah.
and love and service.
Yes. Yes, I'm loving this conversation. Absolutely, absolutely. I work with spiritual entrepreneurs, or one of the groups of people that I'm honored to work with, spiritual women entrepreneurs. I call them, my spiritpreneur priestesses. And it seems like, and I thought for a long time that business was somehow separate from spirituality. But there is nothing that will bring all of your issues to the forefront and send you in need of spiritual healing faster than going into business for yourself or dipping a toe in entrepreneurship. And it's because you're declaring your purpose and moving toward that purpose, and then having to have conversations about money, which again we think is separate than our spirituality, but it's all the same. How you do anything is how you do everything.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
you know it's sacred work. It's sacred work. And so if we would I had this conversation a couple of weeks ago with someone who was asking about a course that I was doing. She was saying that the course was really that it was expensive, and I have certain things I have tons of stuff that's free, probably like more free stuff than anyone. I have tons of stuff that's free, and then I have tons of stuff that's really inexpensive, and then I have some things that cost a lot more. And so she was saying that this one particular thing was really expensive. And so in preparing to talk about it and have a conversation, I just like to see who I'm talking to. So I went and I looked at her profile, and she was flying to another country to go and see Beyonce perform, which is awesome and amazing that she should do that. And she had bought Beyonce tickets for $1,000 a ticket and was traveling to somewhere, I think Italy, to go and see Beyonce perform. Well, when you're working with a healer or a teacher or a coach, it's just as powerful and impactful as going to see Beyonce perform or whomever. Like, it's just in what we choose to value, and nothing's wrong with that. I love Beyonce. I would absolutely go, if I
Yes.
could
Yes.
experience it, that's great. But again, it's not a question of, well, why does this person charge that, or why does whoever charge what? It's just making a decision about what is in alignment for you, and what isn't, and
Yes.
realizing, particularly when it comes to talking to spiritual entrepreneurs about money, that you can have a conversation about money and the energy of money that is spiritual, that is creative. All of the stories we have that money is not spiritual, or money is not creative, or
Right.
money is not feminine, or money is not, all of these things that keep us out of the stream of earning, and being paid. They say paid what you're worth, but I don't think that's possible. You can't be paid what you're worth, because we're, you know,
Oh.
like valuable beyond measure, but approximating that.
Is there a different self-worth from, of course, being paid for what you're worth and what maybe your great grandmother taught you about self-worth?
So my great great grandmother, I only met her. I knew her when I was 4. So, but I did learn learn lessons from her, from the people that she
Passed
taught.
on, sure.
And so here is a beautiful lesson that I learned from her. So I don't think that there's any difference between you working with a client. So you working with someone, if someone came to you and you were working with them as a counselor, advisor, healer, imparting, your teachings to them, and them handing over a credit card and saying, "Here, Goddess Lisa is my credit card," versus the in Guyana where she was paid in chickens and in goats, and people bringing her eggs and all of those sorts of things. We have a story in our heads. I had it for a long time that somehow that was more noble, but she was being paid by the commerce of
Of
her
the
support
day.
at the
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
And so that was the commerce. If people brought you or brought me in New York City goats and eggs, and
Right.
that's great, but I
Maybe
wouldn't know
eggs.
what to do with them. Yeah, eggs, maybe eggs.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't I wouldn't know where to put the goat, or what to do with it, and my mortgage company probably wouldn't be that interested
Right.
in the goat as well. And so it's an energy exchange. It's an energetic exchange. And it's exactly the same. It's just dealing in the commerce of the day. And so she was doing her work, her soul's work, her purpose work,
Hmm.
moving her work forward. And people in love and appreciation for that work were having the energetic exchange of saying, okay, here is a bushel of whatever, in exchange for the work that you're doing. And it's exactly the same as if they say, okay, well, here is my Amex card in exchange for what you are doing. Exactly the same.
Hmm.
Exactly the same thing, and it's
It wasn't done also without that trade. It wasn't done necessarily for free or multiple times for free or the goat coming 7 weeks later. And right. It was done at the time, and there was an honest trade that occurred. And I think that's definitely a lost, not a lost art. It's something that needs to get rekindled in modern day business.
Yes. Yes.
No, I love these. I really love these teachings, and there's something to be said for, yes, we have our connections to spirituality, but when it comes from a place of such depth and such history and a community that has, thrived for a very, very long time on these principles and on these merits, then I would love to bring it. I love what you're doing is bringing it to a country that is maybe, or or a group of people that have lost this frequency, that have gotten so tied up in consumerism and, um, as I said earlier, the fear that's coming from our news cycles, that we've really forgotten how humanity was built.
Mm, mm,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And we can't forget. We can't allow anyone to forget. And I love that about, oh my goodness, these the like you said, like the 18-year-olds who are coming are like not on my watch. Like they
No,
have like this energy that is beautiful, this beautiful confrontational energy.
it
uh,
is.
okay, yes, yes, and it's wonderful.
And action oriented also. And I think, they're the stewards of our earth as well. They're being uh, given this planet that has the need for radical change, and a political climate that's in need of radical change. And it is a tall order. And so it's not for those that are not going to be able to handle it as well. It is those who are needing to step up. Leaning in and having difficult conversations is just going to be part of it all. And I know that we got away from that as women. I mean, we didn't even have a voice to vote, not so long ago, or to buy our own homes or to have a place at the table. And that was not so long ago.
No,
So
not.
it's, yeah, it's definitely speeding up. Um, so, okay, another thing I wanted to ask you, you're a mom of a little one, and do you have traditions that you share and carry on through your family?
Absolutely. I have, so she's going to be two at the time of this recording. She's about to be two in, I guess, in about, wait, 2 months.
Couple months or something, yeah.
Exactly, yeah, exactly 2 months. And so, I'm looking forward to this will be the first Christmas where she is, aware and can, and able to excited and able to participate. So I have like those kinds of traditions that I'm looking forward to with her. And then we have, our silly fun family traditions. Like my family is huge into Sound of Music. We're like big
Uh-huh.
fan. So she's already like singing those songs like so long, farewell. So we had those kinds of traditions. And then also, our Guyanese and African rooted traditions, having her participate in those things. So she loves playing. My daughter, her name is Amethyst Ruby. She loves playing the drums with my dad, and playing the drums. He has one of his drums over at my house because she loves drumming, and I gave her a little drum. She loves that. And is again part of the evolution that my in my father's generation, my father in Guyana, when he was a kid and he was coming up, African spirituality was illegal. This is in my father's lifetime.
Wow.
African spirituality was illegal, so they had to hide their drums. There were raids and that sort of thing when they were coming out of being a former British colony. And this is
Mm.
not uncommon. This is common throughout many places in the Caribbean. And so, going from a generation where he had to hide his drums and to now his granddaughter drumming, which is really, really cool also because in many different African societies, drums were not taught to women and girls. And so, they in ancient times, women were the drummers, but as patriarchy took over in many places, women were forbidden from drumming because drumming is a communication tool that, for example, throughout the diaspora, African people throughout the diaspora were able to send each other messages through drumming.
Hmm.
And so having my daughter have a love of drumming and being able to drum, that is really awesome and exciting. And she loves my Oracle cards. We just came out with a pocket deck version, a
Oh,
smaller. And so it's like for her, like this is the size of the pocket deck compared to the bigger
yeah,
one.
oh, she loves it.
It's like it was made for her.
Yes, exactly.
It's
Does
made to
she
fit her hands.
did she express or do you teach her how to listen to her intuition?
I do. I do. I'm working with her on learning how to understand her intuition and understand what she's feeling. And so we do yoga. And so we're working on when she feels frustrated to hug herself, you
Oh,
know, or to breathe. Yeah. So she goes,
yeah.
and she's working with that, like trying those
That's
things.
gotta be so cute
It's
at under
so
two.
adorable. It is
Adorable.
so absolutely adorable. She's brilliant. She's a genius, of course. You know that.
Of course, there, yes, all of our kids are. Absolutely. But then teaching her to, I'm sure she has, the knowledge of you knowing intuition and you feeling what that feels like to really exercise and express from a very, very young age to be raised with that message is powerful. And it's never too late for anyone listening, or if you have young children or no young children, teach them to listen to their intuition as we are learning ourselves to listen to our intuition.
Yes.
So, by the
So
way, how do adults work with you? How can adults work with you?
So I work with people in a number of different ways. So I have a number of different courses, and I work with people either specifically around spirituality, empowerment, and intuition, or around spiritual business. So, and it's really one and the same, but those are the two different paths that people usually come to work with me. And so every year I have an international retreat. As I said, I also have courses. The ones that are active right now are my African Goddess Rising Oracle course, which if you are hearing this and it's in resonance with you, then come on through. I have an upcoming priestess course that I'm doing. And as I said, work that I do with my spiritpreneurs. And so I all of this you can find at womanifesting.com. So like manifesting.com, but womanifesting.com. And
Oh, I love it.
the easiest way for folks to be able to work with my work is to grab a book or grab an oracle deck, begin to work with it, feel if it feels at home, and then if you're wanting to go deeper with those things, to come, and I would love to work with you further.
The artwork on your website is absolutely beautiful. Are you also an artist?
I am. I actually have an art degree and I'm participating in an art day this week, but the art that you're seeing, none of it is mine.
It's beautifully chosen, then I should
Yeah,
say.
thank you. Thank you so much. It
Yes.
probably may be you may be seeing the work of Destiny Powell, who, like I said,
Does the
designed,
decks.
yeah, not only this deck, but my Secrets of the Ancestors Oracle deck that comes out in March, available for pre-sale now. And
Wow, that sounds amazing.
yeah, yeah. So that deck is coming out in March, and it is specifically in working with your ancestors to bring forward the answers, the knowledge, the teachings that you are being given. And we all descend from one woman who is called mitochondrial Eve, so we're all related.
Oh, I love that mitochondrial Eve.
Real Eve,
It
yeah,
makes sense. It's the mitochondria of Eve. But
yes.
I also, okay, abiolaabrams.com, which I've searched a million times, and you can look up Abiola Abrams. But I love We're Manifesting really has a great ring to it. You have a good name there for the website and lots to learn. And I have enjoyed searching, and that you can also listen to one of the ceremony that you do on the website, which is a grounding ceremony, and you use the bowls, which you have with you. I forgot to share that with our audience here. Can you show us one of the crystal bowls that you work with?
Sure. So I also have several different meditation albums. I work with guided meditations and visualization. So you can find those on Amazon or wherever you would buy on Hay House's website or wherever you would buy a meditation album. And using sound healing is for me one of the ways that I help us to empower ourselves. So let's just give us just.
Mm. Wonderful way to go out. Thank you so much for that. Absolutely beautiful. I appreciate you and your time and your energy and your frequency and everything else. Thank you again.
Thank you, Goddess Lisa. Until next time. Deep
Until next time, I invite you to stay aware.